What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Spin. Today we'll be discussing the RNC. I'm joined today with Sheifalika Bhatnagar, John Melancon, and Kevin Luhrs. Sheifalika, the term Trojan horse was thrown around a lot in the RNC, specifically when Trump said that Joe Biden was a Trojan horse for socialism. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, I believe Trump brought up the concept of the Trojan horse when he was in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, I believe earlier this month. And he started talking about Biden being a Trojan horse for communism, specifically for China. And it reminded me a lot about the 2016 election, the rhetoric used against Hillary Rodham Clinton and Bernie Sanders, making the concepts of socialism a boogeyman kind of concept. The Chinese government is communist, and we all know this, and it is a far reach to call Joe Biden a Trojan horse for the Communist Party of China. I think in some ways they're using international politics against China due to the fact that the coronavirus began in Wuhan. However, there are many countries who support Biden, including China, particularly from what they've said that Trump is too unpredictable of a president and they would like some sort of normalcy coming out of the United States. And I believe other countries across the world, democratic, socialist, republics, all alike, would agree that they want a more predictable and reliable president for the greatest office in the world.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. But a lot of people, like, for example, a lot of people say Bernie Sanders is a democratic socialist, but the reality is that if you look at the actual things that he's proposing, socialism talks about worker cooperatives. They talk about workers owning the means of production. That's not what Bernie Sanders advocates. He advocates for social programs, for welfare, markets. I mean, well, a heavily regulated market. A lot of people like to use the example of Sweden and Norway. Those are social democratic countries. Those are not democratic socialists. So we need to make sure that we have the labels right. Not only do we have but if we actually get this notion that Bernie Sanders is not a communist out of our minds, then you realize the Trojan horse argument really falls apart, because if Bernie Sanders is not a socialist and he's not a communist, I don't understand how Joe Biden would be considered a Trojan horse for socialism. It's a bad argument. It's an argument that's, in my opinion, very fallacious.
Socialism is a political and social economic philosophy encompassing a range of economic and social systems characterized by a social ownership of the means of production and workers, self-management, and enterprises. To me, the way he used it is just fear tactic. Something that's just been used since Reagan was running for office. Or well, even before that, if you want to be honest, but just making it a little bit more modernized. But this is all nothing but just another way of just convincing him and his followers that basically, how can I explain this? His accusations without merit is something that was without merit. Just something that he just want to feed this idea that basically I'm the president for you. Hey, I do review. I don't follow. Is it Russia? My apologies. Russia, or anything of that sort. To say that Joe Biden is a Trojan horse with me basically was it's just like to lure everyone in, just to bring socialism in once he's in office. I don't agree with that. I just think that's kind of just another way of just kind of inciting voter rage.
In 2016, the use of outside international forces like Russia, for example,
right,
and now it's China. So it seems like the Republican Party and the conservative campaigns really lean on an outside boogeyman instead of addressing the problems that we as a country as a whole face today.
Everyone wants to blame everyone but themselves. And that's just honestly what it's going to be. You can shake hands with Vladimir Putin 7 days a week, but in the faces of Americans, you would revoke everything, anything and everything about them, even though there are ties. There have been cases where you've been in constant communication with Russia, and there's been allegations of Russia's interference with the last presidential election, or even with the coronavirus. We're going to blame China for the way that we're handling things on the mainland. That's not leadership. That's something else.
Scapegoating.
Scapegoating, yes.
Trump said that he believes that he's done more for the African American community than any president after Lincoln. Kevin, what are your thoughts on that? Can you back it up?
I think that's quite frankly a ridiculous comment. First off, a common point that he makes is that African American unemployment before coronavirus was at its lowest point, but that deserves a giant, big asterisk. And the reason why I say that is because it can be linked to the economic recovery after the Great Depression. For example, when you look at, for example, stats from St. Louis Federal Reserve, or the Federal Reserve of St. Louis, my bad. But when you look at that, unemployment was here and then it went down. It went down under Obama's presidency. And I think that it has less to do with Donald Trump's policies than it has to do with the biggest economic expansion in human history, honestly, especially American history. So the idea that this is somehow Trump's, not only Trump's doing it's ridiculous. And not only that, when you look at, for example, Lyndon Baines Johnson, he signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. He helped, desegregate America, and he helped push through voting rights through Congress. So the idea that Trump has done more than Lyndon Baines Johnson, I think is quite frankly ridiculous, and it's not an argument with a strong foundation. So I don't buy it. I really don't.
I agree. I think comparing himself to Abraham Lincoln was another far reach as well. And if you want to talk about Lincoln and bring him up, let's talk about the fact that he wrote the Emancipation Proclamation. And in 1862, during the Confederate Rebellion, when the Union armies were taking in slaves who had freed themselves by escaping slavery into the northern states, into states that were anti-slavery, the Emancipation Proclamation was primarily a military measure at that time, after the Battle of Antietam, I believe. And Lincoln wrote that into law, making the freed slaves, giving them the opportunity to join the Union troops. So it was really a military idea at the time, and it benefited people. It did not actually free all slaves. Not until Lincoln signed the 13th Amendment was slavery abolished. And even with that amendment, there were still some exceptions. For example, anybody who is incarcerated can be subject to involuntary work. And that is where you get, Sam's Cooke song, Chain Gang, talking about prison labor. And even today in our 21st century, we still see the military and the prison reform needed in order to give prisoners an actual quality of life and education during their time served. So to call yourself Lincoln and to take on, at that time, in that history, Lincoln was a part of the Republican Party. However, the ideals of the Republican Party have totally switched with the Democratic Party since then. So ideally, if Lincoln were to come back today, he would say, I'm more Democrat than I am Republican. And I doubt Lincoln would stand for a president as divisive as President Trump so far.
If he's going off unemployment has been steadily decreasing since 2010. So it's been an ongoing trend for African American unemployment to be decreasing since 2010. At its peak, I want to say 2009. In 2009, it was at 6%. It's either 2009 or 2010, but it has gone down literally a point since then. That's not to say that basically he hasn't done a job. What I'm saying is basically there was a blueprint already laid out for him by 44, when 45th was in office. There's already a trend that's steadily going, that was already established. So he can't take full credit for that. And the fact that he's comparing himself to Abraham Lincoln as a Black man, that is a joke to me. To specifically, why single out Abraham Lincoln, the man that signed the Emancipation Proclamation that freed Black people? Why that specific president? That is it's more of like he's calling himself a Black savior. That and that's insulting. That is insulting. That's insulting to people that have worked hard their entire lives, people that have worked hard to make this country what it is. That's insulting to people that have worked their ways towards buying their freedom that they were born into restriction on. So to me, what else can you credit yourself for? You know, what else can you say, hey, other than unemployment going down, which is something that was already established from the previous administration? What else have you done? Social injustice is still a thing. You know, we're still dealing with the struggles of systematic oppression. That's still a thing. So yeah, no, I can't really agree with that. And the fact that he's using Lincoln to single things out the same way he's went to, I think he was holding a rally in Oklahoma, in Oklahoma City, where it was historically it was historically kind of like Black Wall Street, essentially. That was also like a slap in the face to me. Not to say like it's not a welcoming thing, but the fact that it was going to be held on the day it was going to be held, and it's kind of like little context clues he's leaving, little breadcrumbs, and he wants us to kind of know these things. And some people are taking the bait, and some people are just kind of mad at the mess.
To Trump's credit, I have to admit he did add 9 million jobs to the economy. However, in the last 18 months, we have lost 22 million. So we're operating at a deficit already. One of the promises in his speech at the RNC was to add 10 million jobs in 10 months. Even if that is feasible and possible, first of all, I hope any president can add that many jobs. Second of all, we'll still be at a deficit, and our economy is about to plunge into another recession, which is the exact mess Obama inherited and was still able to add jobs over his 8 years. The last 3 years of Obama's presidency added a lot of jobs to the economy, and Trump in his first 3 years is still 500,000 shy of Obama's last 3 years. So we have to keep these numbers in perspective.
So, John, how do you think the RNC did in terms of covering recent events such as protests or the coronavirus?
They could have did a better job, honestly. They could have did a better job at highlighting things to what they are and stop trying to be as diplomatic, I guess, in a sense to where it was still satisfying their own agenda to me. If Melania Trump stated that how she wanted everyone to look at each other's perspective, which, yes, I understand that definitely needs to be had. But at the end of the day, acknowledge the fact that there is a problem and acknowledge the fact that there's going to be some things that's going to, we're going to address the problem. We're going to address the thing, address the elephant in the room. Mike Pence definitely did not seem that he could empathize with what exactly is going on in the world and how basically there needs to be some type of conversations about law enforcement and its treatment of minorities in this country. You know, there needs to be these type of conversations. Instead of being diplomatic about your own agenda, represent who you're supposed to represent, everyone in the whole, like state everybody's perspective.
With the way that they do it, they try to make it an issue of law and order. And the thing is that if you look at the numbers, it's not working. It doesn't work. You know, the public image of Black Lives Matter has gone up. I have seen people I would have never thought would ever support Black Lives Matter start supporting Black Lives Matter. And that is anecdotal, but there are numbers to support that notion. But not only that, they constantly focus on the riots. Well, yes, rioting is bad. But look at why they're rioting. You know, people don't just randomly come together in some ad hoc group to start rioting. It's a symptom of a problem that needs to be fixed. I understand. I don't condone it. Never condone rioting. But at the end of the day, we need to understand that we need to not let it distract from the real problem, which is systematic oppression. At the end of the day, that's what people are angry about. So the idea that this is, that they covered the protests well is no. And not only that, if we look at coronavirus, I'm sorry, I'll finish this up because I'm taking a lot of time. But if we look at the coronavirus, we look at countries that locked down quickly, they're able to open up more sooner. They have seen less deaths. Countries that have tested more.
Alice Johnson, a nonviolent offender whose sentence was commuted by Trump, gave a very powerful speech at the RNC. How do you think this aided his campaign, Kevin?
Not at all. If you want me to be honest, it's going to have zero electoral effect. One speech is in one part and is just not going. It's going to erase the last 4 years, basically. Just not going to do anything. It's not going to improve turnout in Ohio. It's not going to improve turnout in Michigan or Wisconsin or Pennsylvania or Florida. I mean, if we're looking at Georgia, for example, Georgia's in play. Should it be in play? That's voted. That's a strong Georgia. That's a strong Republican state. It shouldn't be in play, but it is. So the idea that it's going to erase the last 4 years and it's going to help deliver him the presidency, it's not going to work. It doesn't work. Like most eligible voters who are African American are voting for Joe Biden. Those are numbers that are out there. Not over 90%. It's not going to work. It's not going to fix the fact that he has gassed people, protesters. It's not going to change the fact that he's used a church as a photo op. It's just not going to work. So I just think it was. I just think that the pardon was a publicity stunt. In all honesty, I don't think it was. I don't know what it's in Trump's heart, but I don't think it was to help this woman at all. So
I believe that part of the reason that Trump was even aware of Alice is due to the efforts of Kim Kardashian herself, a fellow reality star. So I am happy that her sentence was commuted, and I'm happy that during her time in prison, she spent so much time educating herself, becoming involved in the Special Olympics, and also just keeping her mind free, which was really the point and the heart of her speech, was that even if she was in prison, that her mind was still free. And now that she's out, and I'm grateful for that fact, because she was in prison, she received life plus 25 years for a nonviolent crime. And so I'm glad that she's out, but there are still so many people in prison right now for nonviolent offenses that, does Trump even know about them? And furthermore, how can we reform our system as a whole and our legislative and prison system in order to keep these people out of life sentences for nonviolent offenses? That's a further bigger question, and I'm not sure when we're going to see that as a reality in our country.
Glad y'all said something. I'm glad, Sheifalika, you touched on that. That was brought to his attention by Kim Kardashian West. That was not something he found. That was not someone he looked into. That was nothing like that at all. This is honestly just a plant, a media stunt. Just like Kevin said, this is not something this is a mask. He's using this lady as a mascot. To say it's more like when you say Black Lives Matter, well, what about black on black crime? Does it matter? It's like, this is literally like an answer to be like, see, Trump loves black people. He freed somebody. Great, that's cool. She was nonviolent. I'm not going to praise someone for doing something that shouldn't have been done in the first place. Just me from a moralistic standpoint, I'm not about to do that, because at the end of the day, I understand her enthusiasm. I understand it. Her time was taken away from her for a nonviolent offense. She was not a danger to society. And I understand that. But to sing his praises the way she did, the enthusiasm, I understand. Basically, she owes a lot to this man because she's able to hug her grandchildren, like she stated. And that's something that she has not been able to do for 22 years. She was sentenced in 1996. So I get it, I understand it, but no, I don't feel like it's going to help his political agenda at all. Matter of fact, I feel like, honestly, for people that honestly have tuned in, it's going to hurt him even further because I don't know if I could say this, but it's kind of like shucking and jiving. It's kind of like dancing for some type of political agenda in a sense. It's kind of like basically like light privilege, light skin privilege type of thing. If we're going back to those type of times, a lot of people cannot look at this one act and seem like he cares, because there are millions of cases where women were locked up for defending themselves, and they are still currently incarcerated and they were released outside of his enthusiasm, outside of his assistance. Centoya Brown being one of the most premier inmates that have experienced being incarcerated due to just defending herself. She was taken away as a 15, 16-year-old girl and didn't get out and spent over 10 years of her life in prison for defending herself. So no, I'm good on that.
Alrighty, well, that's all the time we have for today, guys. I'm Caitlin Bowers.
I'm Jonathan Melancon.
I'm Kevin Luhrs.
And I'm Sheifalika Bhatnagar.
And this has been The Spin.